When I was a young boy, there was actually it's in the elementary school. There was a large road in front of the elementary school. And just in case you didn't know what a large road was when I was in the urban area, it's a large enough road where actually a car could actually drive through. And so in that unpaved road, there was wide enough and there was willow trees that was planted every about 10 meters, about and these are about 10 to 15 meters tall. And actually they were actually wide enough, more than a person, maybe two, three persons. And when you're walking down there, it's like a scene from a movie. And beautiful trees that line this road. And about 100 meters, maybe 200 meters, you can see all the way down. When the winter comes, the trees are full of cicadas, and they are singing and they are chirping, and these are beautiful sounds that we see when we're walking to school. And when they're going down, and these large willow trees had one fatal weakness because they were so tall and they were taking the wind so well that they easily fell over when there's wind, especially when there's wind and rain. And the phenomenon occurs because the roots are not deep enough to compare to the height and the width of it. And in the days that rains are heavy and the winds are blow, the willow trees always have a fall and uprooted from the road. And when we see King Solomon here today, I think of this willow tree that I saw when I was a child. I see the life of willow trees in an examination or an example of how sturdy he was, how big he was, but he could not withstand the wind and rain, and it was uprooted quickly and fell. And it was like watching Solomon's life. And when in the evaluation of King Solomon, he's extremely polarizing. Judging from his accomplishments, he is the greatest king in the world. During the King Solomon's time, the population of Israel became numerous like the sands in the seashore, and there was no shortage of food, shelter, and no one went hungry in the land. And the territory was occupied from the Euphrates River all the way down to Egypt. The tributes received from these countries, the gold that came in from the tributes were so abundant, they even made shields from the gold. And silver was so common that they were on the ground and was less valued than some of the stones that they had. And the army was so strong, there was 4,000 chariots and they had 12,000 horses that could pull these chariots. And this is recorded in Kings. And it took 7 years to build the Temple of Jerusalem and 13 years to build the palace of the king that's going to be living in there. It's a magnificent building. And in fact, no king ever matched Solomon's wisdom. The story of Solomon's judgment of the two women who were fighting over a baby, is acclaimed all over the world. They wanted to split the baby in half with the knife, and it represented Solomon's wisdom. And in fact, Solomon did not end here. He wrote 3,000 proverbs. He composed 1,500 songs, and he's also known for botany, zoology, ethnology. Solomon was one of the greatest kings in the history. But this huge tree fell down, and there was a thud, an instant sound that happened all over the world. And when a big tree falls, the sound is loud. And when a small tree breaks, there's nothing that really happens. But when there's a big tree breaks, the ground shakes, the heaven and earth shakes. Not only that the tree shake, the whole entire Israel was shaken apart. Then why did such a great tree, Solomon, fall? In fact, Solomon, who had accomplished these great things, there was another side. It's just not one thing. There's things that we have not been able to see in the life of Solomon. And this is in 1 Kings 11:3, 7, and 8. It says, he had 700 wives. He had princesses and 300 concubines, and his wife turned away his heart. Then Solomon built a high place in Cheremush, the abomination of Moab, and the Molish, and the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did all that the foreign wives who made offerings and gods to their gods. How many wives? 700. How many concubines? 300. He had 1,000 wives or 1,000 women. And these mostly are foreign women. They're not women of faith. They're not Jewish women. They were foreign women. And Solomon, and what did he do for these the foreign women? That he made a temple for them, for their gods, because they were lonely when they departed from their country. And so they said, listen to me once, grant me one wish. Just give me a small temple where I can worship my God freely. And in fact, that's what he granted for them. And so he built it for them. And so how many did he build? Probably 1,000, maybe not 1,000, maybe hundreds for sure. And this is Jerusalem became not a kingdom of God, but it became a place of foreign gods. In fact, Solomon has taken God's great temple and everything else. Hundreds of other temples were built around, didn't they? In fact, when you look at the temple in Jerusalem, looked like the grandest temple. But if you really look on the outside, there were all kinds of other foreign temples. And Solomon has done this. And so looking back, in personal life was in shanders. In fact, the shadow that he casts around Israel and the history of Israel, and in fact, it is the idol that Solomon brought in, and in the 400 years, they fought this idolship, and the idols that Solomon brought in, and the idols ultimately tore down Israel. And because of David, the father of Solomon, they were blessed. And he ruled with the glorious glory. Who messed it up? The greatest glory that he received? It is Solomon with his own hands. Did you know that Solomon, when he was in power and when he was in rule, and he looks back and actually he regrets it. But it's too late to turn back. And in fact, he tells to the young people this way in Ecclesiastes 12, 1 and 2. It says, remember also your creator in the days of your youth, before the evil day comes and the year draws near, which you will say, I have no pleasure in them, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. And he's telling the young people, don't live like me. Realize this. Look at the Creator. Before it's too late, before you lose everything, realize what's going to happen. And in fact, when you look at Ecclesiastes 4:13, it says this, better a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. Who's he talking about? He's talking about himself. He's talking about himself, exactly about himself. So now, we must find out why a great mighty Solomon had to fall like this. We have to understand this. Solomon's life seemed to be free of problems from when you look at it from the outside. It looks like he's been the greatest blessed person. In fact, he had a father that was most faithful to God and did you know that when Solomon was born, God said that he's going to love Solomon, that God loved Solomon. It's a person that really was somebody that was about God and it was beloved by God. However, Solomon had several shocking events in his life and his childhood that may be difficult for him to handle. First, he witnessed Absalom, his half-brother, killing Amnon. And he experienced this. Second, there was a coup d'etat by Absalom against his father. He saw this. And at this time, Solomon was led by his mother and fled Jerusalem. And he saw this. Third, there was a coup d'etat of Adoniah, who created to try to become him himself. And if Adoniah, if he didn't do that, if he became king, Solomon would have died. In fact, this was a direct connection to Solomon's own life. And so that as he was young, he continued. He had shocking events as a young person. Did you know who he needed? His mother. Did you know that the Jews, it's the faith of the mother. It's Bathsheba. And Bathsheba, she does not really become the right mother. And if I said Bathsheba's story, it's about 30 more minutes. It's too long, so I pulled this out. But after these twists and turns in Solomon's life and then became king, historians say that he was probably 18 to 20. And I think if you look at this, we don't really know exactly what his age is, but it could be 18 to 22. He becomes king. And how great must have been the burden on Solomon to be king at that age. He had to rule the country strained by rebellion and build the temple. And this country was divided. And in fact, he had to collectively put them together and build the temple. And the two king, when he was 18, to handle this is a very difficult thing to handle. And in fact, David, that should have been the strength for him, already died. And in fact, in the world, he had no place to go. And thus he goes to Bathsheba. Bathsheba wasn't a person of faith. And so the place that he can lean towards, it is actually God that David served. And this is why Solomon remembered what David has done, as giving sacrifices, and he goes before God, and God meets with him. And this is in actually 1 Kings 3 and 3 to 4. It says, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrifices made at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was a great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And in fact, as he was doing the burnt offerings, he decides to give 1,000 offerings. And it's not 1,000 days of offering. It is actually 1,000 burnt offerings. I'm not sure what they cut, what they killed. Is it cows or lambs? It was about 1,000 things that he has given. And this 1,000 sacrifices, he is given the struggle. This shows the struggle in his life to live. And this was the fierce struggle to overcome his desperate situation, his fierce struggle and fight over a situation. And if it wasn't this desperate, and after the 1,000 sacrifices, God appeared to Solomon and it says, and God says, what can I give you? And Solomon says, just give me wisdom, Lord. And Solomon, in desperation that's contained here, God says, no, I will give you wisdom, but I will give you the greatest wealth. And so everything else. And in fact, many people say that he was humble, but it is not true. He was desperate in seeking these things. It is not to seek everything else. They had no power to solve the issues before him. In fact, I cannot rule over this country without the wisdom. So I need this wisdom. I need this desperation, this hardship. I need just wisdom to do that. And that's the prayer that he has given. My beloved, this Solomon, God saw his heart. And he blessed him greatly. And he allowed him to achieve the glory earlier. Now, this process up to here, Solomon was good. God blessed Solomon. And in fact, everything in the wisdom that was given to Solomon, God's glory was realized. The country was united. However, and then as God was going through this, Solomon was going in a different place and he wasn't following the word of God. In fact, he would receive all the blessings. And in fact, the personal life of Solomon, he wasn't following the word of God. And in the deep relationship with God was being separated. Rather, he followed the methods and means by the people of the world to achieve his goals. And this is really shown in his marriage. And this is in 1 Kings 14:21. It says, now Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old and he began to reign. And he reigned over 17 years in Jerusalem. The city of the Lord has chosen out all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother was Naamah the Ammonite. And Solomon had Rehoboam. And he was a son to Solomon. And who was his wife? It was Ammonite. It's Naamah. And in fact, he selected a foreign wife because it is not a marriage his first marriage was Naamah, an Ammonite. And this was a political marriage, not for real marriage. And this is in actually 1 Kings 3:1. Solomon had made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and house of the Lord in the wall around Jerusalem. In fact, he is taking his wife, the Pharaoh's daughter, in fact, strengthened his political alliances. In fact, he continued these political alliances together. If you look at 1 Kings 11:1, it says, Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughters of Pharaoh, the Moabite, Amorite, Edomites, Sodomites, and the Hittite women. In fact, every time he needed to have peace in the land, he used this methodology in the political marriages. He wasn't relying on God. He wasn't relying on meeting with God. And that wasn't it. But he did it politically. And in fact, everything was being realized. And he personally, everything wasn't following God's plan, not the method of plan. He was going according to the world's plan. And at this time, for 20 years, he ruled over Israel. And the result was this: he got everything he wanted. Let's look at verse 1 today. As soon as Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, everything was built. 20 years it took for him then. 7 years for the temple. 13 was his. It was actually for 20 years at least. And Solomon, he did great work. In fact, nobody could even touch Solomon. He was a legend. And in fact, in the root of his faith was shallow. Although he was really visibly a big accomplishments, the root of his faith was very shallow. My beloved, Solomon, at this time, at king, and he does not serve or obey any of God's commands. It says, if you are king, you do this. And it says, do this. And it says this, that in the rules that God gave kings, it says, don't take a lot of horses. You know what? David did that. In fact, he cut the Achilles tendons of the horses. So and it says, but Solomon did everything to increase these horses. And the second, God says, do not keep many wives. He had how many wives? 1,000. And it says, the third thing is, God commanded kings not to put gold and silver for your treasury. And now 3, it says, you always read the law of the Lord as king. And all 4 of these things, Solomon, not one thing that he has kept. And that is why on the outside, it's a huge empire that he's built. But the faith that he built, and it wasn't built on how big the empire was, his roots in faith was very shallow. In fact, it looked really big on the outside, but inside he had great frustration. But many people saw him and saw great things, but inside could always fall. And in fact, it was a rotten soul inside. And at this time, God calls him again. And this is in verse 2. This is verse 2 today. It says, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, and he appeared to him in Gideon. And this is 20 years after. And after the 1,000 sacrifices, burnt offerings, he says, just give me wisdom, Lord. And I can't handle this, Lord. I'm in desperation. I need wisdom. And from that time, and from 20 years later, God appeared to him again in Gibeon. And for Solomon. And it tells Solomon, it says, you're not doing everything right, Solomon. It says, turn, Solomon. And it says 3 things. It says 3 things. It says, first, it says that in your house, I am in your house, that my eyes are in your heart. And in fact, I am going to be in that temple forever. But if you pray, I will always meet with you. I will listen to your plea. I heard and prayers and come back to me. That's what God is saying. Just like you've given 1,000 sacrifices to me. And just as you are desperate, get on your knees and come back to me. That's the message. Second, it says this, David, your father walked. And if you keep the commandments before me as your father walked, that I will give you blessings. And the third is, if you turn aside from following me, that all your children, all the people of Israel that have given you this land will be chased out, and all the temple will be destroyed. And in fact, this was realized. And in fact, there was a chance for Solomon to come back, and he didn't listen to God. In fact, he doesn't return to God at all. And then this is in 1 Kings 11:9 and 10. It says, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart turned away from the Lord, the gods of Israel, and appeared to him twice. And he had commanded him concerning these things, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. And there's only two things that he didn't do it. And he just became too big. And he really didn't have the experience to keep. And in fact, he had a heart that he could do without God. Second, spiritually, that he was totally, and the laws decreed by the father David, and everything that was given was really broken. And what we have to really be careful, that if we forget prayer, if we forget worship, and then God maybe will forget us. He will forgive us. He will love us. But the problem is that when the word is delivered, we don't have a reaction to turn to God. We lose this. When you receive the word, we have to react to it. But he wasn't reacting it. There's nothing to react to it. In fact, even listening to the word, he can react to it. He knows that he has to pray. He can't pray. And this is the worst situation that you can be in. My beloved Solomon, he did not fall because he did not succeed. And many people fail in life and they fall, right? But Solomon was in great success in the world. And in fact, he fell not because he couldn't do what he wanted to do. In fact, he did everything that he wanted to do. He was the greatest success in the world. He had the most than anybody. In fact, he did the greatest thing of anyone before him. But the problem is, even if he realized all this in his heart, there's no joy, there's no peace, and there's no movement. In fact, it came with actually anxiety and fear. And did you know that we live in this world that we always have goals that we want to realize? Did you know that when you have a small success, small anxiety comes? Did you know that when you receive a big, big thing and then big goal, and you realize this, then what comes afterwards? It is actually anxiety and fear. And if the greater the accomplishment, greater the fear that comes before us. And this was it. And that even Solomon received everything that he has wanted to do, that all these things, everything to Solomon was fearsome and there was no peace. But if he had the deep-rooted faith, he had the ability to overcome. He did not have a deep faith. He did not have the strength to overcome these things. Did you know that people, when their emptiness and anxiety and fear comes, then to fill this emptiness, you know what that is? This is alcohol, this is drugs, this is sex, and these are games that they get fallen into. And Solomon, what did it come out to? He was obsessed with women. And he was trying to change women to fill his emptiness, but he was not satisfied. He hugged 1,000 women, but he could not fill this one empty heart. And his life was miserable. And all the things that he came and the women came, what happened to them? They actually stepped in the life of Solomon spiritually. This is the problem. And all the things that we want to fill our emptiness as we bring it in, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex or women, but at the end, what we see, that's what steps our lives and destroys our life. And this is what Pascal is talking about, that the space that cannot be filled with anything, but only God can fill that empty space. And this is because we are spiritual beings. And if the space is not filled, then we are constantly feel emptiness, because our spiritualness was created by God and this emptiness. And we continually seek God. And this is why we seek in the world to fill this emptiness. Cannot be filled with this, because the world cannot fill this with our hearts. It is only God. That God has to be in our hearts to fill our hearts. Now, was Solomon good because he achieved everything that he can? No, he continually fills it with idols. In fact, all the things that's worth that gets filled, and in fact, it gets destroyed by that emptiness. And Solomon, because achieved everything that no one else could, is that okay? So he did a great thing, so little less faith, it's okay, right? Then because he had built a great temple, is that okay? However, in achieving this success, Solomon spread a deadly poison, a cancer that destroyed all of Israel. And if Solomon had not, it was so successful, and he ruled like the only king and followed God's rules, and then Solomon's life himself would have been a good nation. And in fact, it would establish much heavier and lighter. So what we have to focus in on is that what goals are we chasing? What things are we leading in our lives? And in fact, in the 80s and 90s, our Korean church, it realized a great revival. There was a church that had 700,000 people. And there's one thing that I realized during the mission trip. And some people said there is a 1 million churches or 1 million member churches, right? And I just said, that's just a crazy thing to talk about that. And they are raising this empty tower. And in fact, in that poisonous dome or poisonous temple that they're doing, that we are suffering, and the country and the church is falling apart. If we stood it up rightly that way, we didn't need the great buildings of Korea. We didn't need the great temples and the churches that we've built in Korea. If we lived truly by the gospel, then this place, they wouldn't have been suffering this much as a church. Did you know that our success is not about economy? It's not about money. It is not about some goal of success. That there is a poisonous thing that will grow within us. And if you are successful, you're not successful. Even if you made money, that's not going to save you. And if you receive great honor, that honor is not yours. And if you have great power, that power will kill us. And what's more important than success? It is God, being with God. It is being in the gospel of God. It is experiencing the foundation of faith with God. Did you know that David grew with his roots in faith? And it's the relationship with God that he cherished. It's the relationship with God that he sought. It is the relationship with God that David always sought after, regardless of how big he came as a king, and regardless of how dangers came before him. The reason why he was overcome that, because he had his roots in faith. Did David not fall? Absolutely he fell. He had the strength to revive himself. He confessed and repented before God. He had the faith to come back to realize this. Where does this come from? Where does this come from? And then who did he walk with? He walked and experienced with God. And because of that, regardless of how much he fell, he can recover, revive. And Solomon did not have this. He did not have this root. He's just big on top. And in fact, it looked strong, but the root of his faith wasn't deep enough. That's why one time he collapses instantly. We build our lives, if we build our lives lonely, there will come a time when the foundation will shake and the ground will shake up. Regardless of 1,000-story building that we can, if the foundation is bad, then in fact, if it's just a lower small building, 1-story building, if the foundation maybe could be filled. But if you build a really tall tower and your foundation is bad, it'll collapse. And if we're living for the glory of God, and even singers that say that fall. How about the head of the presbytery? And you know what? They are not even embarrassed by that. And they don't even know how to gracefully bow out. And this is what people of faith, the Christians that say that this is the place that we are in. It's the big buildings. It's just big churches. And this is why if they sin, they're not even embarrassed. They're not even embarrassed to move away and walk away from that. And Solomon accomplished everything. He did everything he wanted. Isn't this what we want as we're living this world? Isn't this what we want? So what was the result? What is the result? And if this is everything that we have accomplished, and if it ends up being empty, then what is this? What should be realized is God. If we achieve everything, but if we feel empty, our life will fall apart. It's falling apart. But if you're not successful, and if you are not successful and you don't have this, then that's okay. But you still have the heart to succeed, right? But if you are successful and you feel empty, what is that? And then what is this? And that is where people fall. And that is why doing a great thing, but the greater than that is having the relationship and reviving for God. We are praying for the Joshua Project, and God's changing our prayer topics. And we're saying, God realizes our project. I'm just asking God, what do we have to do? And Joshua Project, God, you're going to do. What are we supposed to do? How am I supposed to do? Why did you give this project to us? And I start to pray for this. And I hope that we can change our prayer request for that. And it says that the Lord works eventually, and that God gives us everything. And then I am beyond that. And I said, God, what do we have to do? And this is the prayer that I'm aiming for now. And the reason why I'm going to the mission trip, and if I stay here, and I think I get used to everything here. I'm comfortable, and I want better things. But if I go to the mission fields, and I realize who I am, and this is why I continually go to mission trips, why I have to deliver the gospel. And what road did we select to go down? And I see that in the mission field. And this is why when I go to the mission fields, I come back alive. I see my goals, and I hope that it is not success and goals that you do it. Then you too will have a shallow faith in God. But your life, give it to God and build it with God. And then live with God and build it with God. And all this with this, experience God, knowing God, praying for that as God, and that you move in action with God, and then God, and in our lives, and everything that we do, He will establish us in our lives. Let us all sing together.